Hello, Steve White, Steve Arts 89. Well, after David Lynch passed, I wanted to do a film marathon. I just completed Alfred Hitchcock marathon where I watched 40 or 50 films. I don't know how many. Seemed like forever. But I needed a break. I needed a couple of days, and I also needed to get comfortable getting into the David Lynch sort of world headspace and netherworld, because it is a disturbing place. And I have to think of my mental health. But after a couple of days, I'm like, okay, I can watch this. So I watched Eraserhead. It was better than I remember, and I think I'm probably going to like this film more than a lot of his other films for various reasons. And I just did a 15-minute review of that. Elephant Man's a bit different. I saw Elephant Man on TV when I was a kid, I'm sure. I knew about the Elephant Man. I knew who he was. I was fascinated by the Elephant Man, and I did love the film. So that was probably my first Lynch experience well before Twin Peaks. And I'm really glad I watched it before I looked at documentaries about the Elephant Man, because as a film on its own, it's amazing, it's brilliant, it's wonderful, and it's very touching, and I found myself crying in many moments and having to stop the film and give myself a moment, because it's so heartbreaking, this character that they depict. Now the film is about Joseph Merrick, and they call him John Merrick because his name was changed for a book. And the film is based on the real life. It's then used Joseph. There's a few issues there as well about the authenticity of his life. He wrote a very small account of his own life, a couple of pages, and then the doctor who treated him wrote, I think, a few chapters in a book about him. And that was what the film was more based on. There was a stage play, which this is not based on. But basically, this character had a disease which they found out later in the 90s he didn't have the disease they thought he did. It was actually a different disease. And I cannot remember the names of either of them. I should have written that down for the purpose of this, but I don't want to talk about medical issues because YouTube will, delete your videos and cancel your channels over stuff like that. So yeah, he is born normally, has a beautiful mother. There's some suggestion that she was attacked by elephants in the 4th month of her pregnancy, and that caused him to be deformed. I don't know where they got that, and we see that visualized by Lynch at the start of the film, where you just have floating images of this woman's face, and then of elephants charging, attacking, and her screaming, and her head going backwards and forwards screaming. I'm like, it almost looks like a grape scene, and I'm like, are they trying to? It's almost, because I think on some level there's this idea that there's some bestiality involved, and that's why he came out like that, and they seem to be playing on that on some visual level, and I found that really disturbing and insulting. Or maybe I'm just projecting because I'm sick. But that's the problem with Lynch. Sometimes you can project, and there's also stuff in there that shouldn't really be in there, but it still is, to mess with people. But so we see him later in life. He was kind of normal to start off with, but then he started to show the deformities early on, and then by the time he was 21, he was disabled by his deformities. And he was forced to be in a freak show and be displayed, and he was horribly abused by a very possessive, I don't know what to call him. He was like an owner, like he was a pet or an animal. And eventually a doctor goes to the freak show and he sees him, and he basically asks to take him to the hospital to have him assessed. And then he plans to, keep him there to help him, and then the freak show owner basically comes back for him. Initially they fought him, but later, because he becomes a celebrity, and people visit him, and a lot of people want to meet him, and they find it's actually good for him, because at first he won't speak. They think he's deaf and dumb, and they eventually realise there's a person in there, and after he gets over his fear and shyness, like an abused animal, he starts talking. They find out he's actually quite intelligent, and then they take care of him. They give him nice clothes. He has guests, and they think that's healthy for him. They have celebrities. One of the ladies from the opera comes to visit him, an actress. She wanted to meet him, and he starts to feel special, not like a freak. And it's kind of beautiful to see this person who appears to have never been inside a house, or to have been raised like an animal. And I just interjected some of his real life into it that's not implied in the film. In the film, there's no indication that he was a normal child or had any normal life before. And you see a moment where a scene where he's in the doctor's house, and he's like looking at the pictures, and he's like on the mantle. He's like, "Oh, is this how people display pictures in their house?" Like he's never been in a normal house, and the wife is just heartbroken, and she can't continue speaking to him at one point because it's just so horrible what he's lived through and what he's been through and how he's been raised like an animal and treated like an animal. Now eventually there is someone who works, I think, in the boiler room downstairs who has come up. He's got access to the building, and he said, "Look, I'm going to exploit you and you can't do anything about it." And he brings people back and to treat him like a freak, and they pay money to see him, and they break into his room and they trash his room and they pour alcohol on him, and they force the women to kiss him, and it's just the most horrific scene you can imagine of abuse of this person who's just gained a sense of self and dignity and self-respect, and then they just drag him back down into the depths of it's the film is a horror film not because of his deformities and the depiction of that, but of the depiction of how he's treated by these humans. And you have that famous scene, which apparently did happen, where he's chased through the train station, and it reminded me of Flinders Street Station when I was looking at it, because it's really ancient. And he ends up trying to escape. He ends up in a toilet. There's like a group of people coming in, the mob, and he just screams, "I am not an animal. I'm not an animal. I'm a human being. I'm a man." And then he collapses, and the police come and sort of rescue him, and they find the cart and they take him back to the hospital. And he has some reacclimation to normal life again. They fire the guy who did this, and there's a wonderful scene where this very stuffy matron nurse who runs the place, who initially treats him like an animal, but realizes how important he is and treats him very well. And one of the doctors calls him out on that, like, "Well, you didn't used to think of him like this." And she goes off, and I love this character. She beats this guy over the back of the head, and she's like, "Well," he's like, "You can't do anything because I work here." She smashes him over the head, and she's like, "Yeah, you're fired." And the funny thing is, because it's based in a Victorian period and it's black and white and it feels like an old film, this seems like a totally outrageous moment for this character. But it's 1979 when this was made, 1980 when it was released, so it successfully feels like a period film. They did manage to capture something of that time and the horror of that, and it is beautiful. But there are some very frustrating things which I'll get into. I've got to finish the story part of it, but it ends tragically where he's taken out by I think one of the royals, and sits in one of the boxes and watches a theatre play by starring I think it's starring the actress that he knows, but she comes out and dedicates it to him, and he just stands up and the whole place applauds him. And it's just this amazing moment for him, and I believe he had a few moments like this when he became sort of like a celebrity. And then at the end of that night, he decides to kill himself because he can't sleep laying down. So he has to sleep sitting up. So he takes away all the pillows and lays down, and that's the end of him. Now, the film itself is amazing. It's beautiful. It has a real feeling. But the issue that I have is the editing. There are scenes where, like for example, the initial, like the monologue of the montage of like the elephants and that. Suddenly it fades to black, and then you see a puff of smoke, and then the birth, and then that fades off again, and it just feels really choppy. And I'm like, there should have been some way to make that smooth and work. It just doesn't work for me. These are all little superficial things. But then we get later into the film. There are scenes where a scene will just end like that, and it won't just be with a sharp cut. It'll be like a fade down to black. Like the line is practically ending and we're going down to black, and I'm like, why did you do that? I said out loud, "What are you doing, David?" I don't understand. Like, did you just want to make a cut there, but you want to make a fade? And it's like, I'm like, and this is early on in the film, and I'm guessing someone said, "What are you doing?" Because that stopped happening, like, as we moved along in the film. And I'm like, I'd love someone to directly ask him about some of those cuts and some of those fades. There's about 3 or 4 of them in the first 20 minutes or so like that, where they seem to just cut a scene off or cut a line off, almost like it is finished being read, but it's like the second the word hits, it's a full fade. So little superficial things like that. But then once you move into the film, it becomes really consistent, and you really do lose yourself in it. It does feel like a real Victorian. Not that I was there, but it's believable. And Lynch, for the longest time, said he had trouble thinking he could do it, and then one day he was somewhere in the UK about to film, and it just hit him, and he felt like he just understood what the period was and was able to confidently depict it. And I think he was successful. Now, the issues I have now with the film is realizing that it is a fiction, and accounts of John Merrick, whose name was Joseph Merrick. Why they don't if it's really his story, why didn't they change it to his real name? He was not raised like an animal. He was not treated like an animal. He was born to a very beautiful mother in a normal house. He didn't have any signs of anything when he was born. They came later. And his mother died when he was 10, and he had a lot of deformities at that point. His mother-in-law hated him, apparently hated him, made him feel unwelcome, and as a teenager he left home. And he joined a circus, he joined a freak show to make money. So it wasn't something he was forced into. He wasn't, he did it for money, he knew what he was doing. He was a fairly smart, he seemed like a streetwise person who knew how to manage his situation, not this victim that we see in the film. So had I known all that, I would not have been able to feel for that character. So I'm glad that I saw the film one last time before finding out it's not really what he was and what the character was. So, but it's an amazing depiction. It's a tragic depiction, and you really feel it. The indignity of this man being treated like an animal, and then finding his humanity and feeling that he really was deserving of respect, and it is amazing performance and amazing film, but it's not accurate. Now, eventually, he went to see his doctor. He stayed with him for a while, and he went off to Europe and made a lot of money. He made enough money to retire off being the Elephant Man, but because he apparently knew what he was doing. But then he got robbed, and his medical issues got worse, and the freak shows were being shut down due to social. This was the late 1800s. Towards the end of the century, they basically said, we don't do this anymore. And they kind of put him out of business, which they did with a lot of the people in the freak shows who resented being put out of business because they did not have any other way to earn money. That's something that they eventually formed their own little town, and they were still being interviewed in the 40s and 50s about stuff like this. But he ended up going back to the doctor, and he has to basically live on charity, where they put out a thing in the papers and asked for donations, and they got about $250,000 back in the day, and he was able to live on that along with a stipend and charity from other people, and he lived out his final days at the hospital in an attic room. And they did mention in the film that he is dying, so he was never going to live, but he did appear, and I don't even know if now it's true, I thought this was true, that he lay down and decided to end his life. But on a high note where things were going great, that's how it's depicted in the film. I need to do a bit more research. But eventually, after he died, they made moulds of his skin and his deformities. They kept his bones. Unfortunately, they bleached them like 2 or 3 times, so they had no DNA to do analysis, because the initial disease they thought he had, which they did an amazing job of publicising when the film was released, unfortunately, it stigmatised all the people with that, and then people lived in fear of their elephantitis, basically, and what that would happen. People would be afraid for their children. Ultimately, it was described as being a negative thing for that community. And then that wasn't even the disease that he had. They found he actually had a different disease. And I really wish I'd written down what they were. But, yeah, so disappointed that they veered so far from the thing. And I'm like, well, did they know? Was this widely known? Like, because I think, was the story that was written in that book not accurate? Because there was a documentary that had his descendants, his uncle's children, so relatives of his, and his family still lives, and they examined his life and that, and there was actually a lot more to find than you think, and just a lot of little things that are disappointing, like the church he builds. I thought he built that from scratch. Those were just sold by kids, they sold for kids at the time, and he put it together, it looks beautiful, but he didn't make it himself, supposedly, the one that is in the museum at the hospital. So maybe he did make one himself, but so it's a great story, it's a great fiction, it's a beautiful work of art, It's not the true story of the Elephant Man, though, and that is disappointing to find that out now, after all these years, all these decades. And now I want to watch more documentaries. And yeah, I had the book and everything, but I didn't actually read it. I've still got a copy of it. But yeah. So the film is brilliant. It's beautiful. There's some editing issues, some pace issues in the beginning. I don't understand what Lynch is doing. Did he not manage to film the scene? It just things seem incomplete and strange. But then it smooths out, and Lynch really shows how great of a filmmaker he could be if he just made a straight film. Not that these other films aren't great in their own right, but I mean, as far as Hollywood and a regular drama. So yeah, I'm going to go. Feel free to share, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think. I was not planning to make videos this long, but it's very hard to talk about David Lynch and keep it short and to the point. So let me know what you think of David Lynch and The Elephant Man. As a film, I love it. It's brilliant. But as a true depiction of The Elephant Man, I'm now very frustrated by it.